Good afternoon, just good afternoon. So I publicised this very late, and I've just got my new VA this week, and the guest that I was planning for this week got pretty sick, and she's just got back into work yesterday, and I said, look, let's do this next week. So it could just be me on my own again, but what I thought I would share, whether you join me or not, or watch this on the replay, was what inspired me to do what I do. I'm going to take my glass off to take the reflection away. So what inspired me to end up doing this? And it just so happens that today is the first anniversary of my mother's death. She was 93 when she died, and she is the reason I do what I do. Now you might think, oh, well, that's nice, Shirley. And you might even think that's obvious, witnessing or being a part of my own mother's menopause would understandably influence me. But I want you to understand why and how it's kind of become, what always was, way bigger for me than simply making an easier journey through menopause. It's become, for me, a mission that relates returning to ourselves, becoming who we really are, and aligning that with challenging norms. And that's what's always driven me. And it's come to this intersection here with menopause anxiety freedom and the Return to Self program that is my core program. So let me share with you, if you will, how that happened, and that requires me to share my mum's journey and my journey, our journey together. So I had not the easiest relationship with my mum. It's not that we didn't, we hated each other, we were totally at odds, but it was not harmonious, shall we say. And I can remember seeing her as a moody person. To me, she was moody, she was bad-tempered, she was difficult. I always felt like I was wrong. I always felt, whatever was going on with her was if it was a bad thing, it was my fault. I was in the way, I wasn't wanted. The kind of person I was not the kind of person I was expected to be. It was uncomfortable. And so I was an angry teenager and a resentful teenager, and she was a kind of disappointed and probably resentful mother. And so that shaped, obviously, our relationship through most of her life and mine. However, in the last couple of decades, I've had time to contemplate, because you get older, wiser, a little more mellow. And I guess really, without realizing it, this contemplation, I said the last couple of decades, it's probably actually only about a decade, that I've really come to terms with understanding what went on with her and me, and drawn any meaning from it that I can share with you. So that probably started with my own menopause, and I began to realize how her own menopause coincided. She was hysterectomy induced menopause, coincided with my mid-teens. And so on a surface level, you think, that's a bad mix. And I've talked about this before. It happens for many of us that a lot of women are also parents of teenagers, as you're going through menopause and you've got teenage, whether they're boys or girls, but probably more meaningfully girls, going through that same hormonal upheaval. Not a great cocktail. It's not a cocktail you'd choose to mix, but it happens. So that in part shaped my feelings about my mother and her feelings about me. We were both in that angry, resentful place, and her moods were doing this and my moods were doing that. So you think, okay, that makes sense. But it shaped me, and it linked to other hormonal events in her life that I think are important to consider. So as I thought about her and came to terms with her more, and began to appreciate her in a way I never had, began to see how courageous, how powerful and strong she was, but not in ways that had value for me. I need to reword that. I don't mean they didn't have value, but they weren't in the ways I wanted to be courageous, but they could be inspirational nonetheless. So let me just backtrack, if I can, to her early life, so when I was born. Because I had this sense of, as a teenager, as you do, you've never understood me. It's always been this way. It's always been bad. And, you know, I carried that for decades. But what I realized, so in my menopausal state, as I'm coming through it and I'm considering her in her old age, you know, in a care home, and questioning, could I make her life better, beginning to have that whole guilt thing set in. So, you know, we talked about the menopausal link with teenagers, but there's also that other, you know, sandwich generation thing, the link with our aging parents, feeling guilty, feeling responsible, feeling like maybe I could do more again, like it's all my fault again, and then feeling bad about that, like, oh God, you know, you should, and there's the shoulds. So all of that, those things that create this horrible Molotov cocktail of guilt and resentment, and mixed in with love and care and feeling crap about yourself and all that stuff. I know you know what I'm talking about. So I began to think about, well, you know, what was it like when I was born? What was life like for her? And I'd always thought, as I say, I felt unwanted. She didn't get me. She didn't want to get me. And I thought, well, hang on, when I was born, her mother, I hadn't really ever put this, her mother had recently died. So sorry, not when I was born, by the time I was under 2, about 18 months, no older, her own mother died. And here she was, a woman with 2 boys, 7 and 9, and a toddler, and her mother's just died. And my dad at that time, as I understand it, would have been working full-time and studying part-time. So he was studying for qualifications to get a better job, to make more money so they could buy a house and not live in a place that I understand was not very nice. So she was juggling 3 children on her own. She was probably postnatally depressed, I suspect, because she did swing in and out of mild depression her whole life. And so she's probably struggling with postnatal depression. She's got these 3 children, and her mother dies. Her mother is her sole support. Like, she, as I understand it, I obviously never witnessed it, but she worshipped her mother. And so she loses this bedrock of support. And the woman who was her best friend ever, had married a GI and moved to the States. So she wasn't around either. She was alone, fundamentally, with 3 children. And I was the youngest. So my brothers obviously had more resilience. They'd known their grandmother. They could draw on one another. They were at school. They had life outside home. And at home, it was just me and my mum. So already her hormones are playing a part in my interpretation of life and the world, and her as a person, and me as a person. So obviously at that age, you don't think about what you become, but I do have a sense, and I can remember her saying to me when I was quite young, that I was an accident. Now, I don't think she ever meant it hurtfully. She was just describing how I was not a planned child. I just happened. But how I received that, because I always felt this sense of being in the way, being a problem. And so being told that as well made me feel like I wasn't wanted. So all of this is feeding into my brain. So by the time she hits her menopause, hysterectomy induced, and I'm in puberty, it all kind of clashes like a head-on collision, and it shaped everything. So what I was resentful for, I couldn't ever share my feelings with her. She was very stoical. She would keep her feelings under wraps. You know, probably, that's just the way she was. That was her generation. but B, she probably thought she was protecting us, that by keeping her feelings under wraps, her emotions under wraps, that somehow that would protect us. I don't know, I never will know, but I can understand why a lot of women, a lot of parents do this. But what we forget, and remember, so now I work with menopausal women, but I spent a while, and I still can see the parallels with working with teenagers, because I got what it was like to be a teenager, that young people sense that they don't need you to tell them that you're feeling rubbish or that you're worried about things. They know. And when you don't tell them, they feel shut out, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to bring that conversation up, because that's not really their role, and it can lead to so much confusion and pain and burden, which is why so many young people are stressed, because they take on the unexpressed stress of their parents. And I was no different, and she was no different. So here she is, struggling with whatever she struggles with, and I know she's struggling, but again, it feels like I have to take that on. So I became bad. We all were, as a family, we were not good at expressing feelings. So that added to things, which meant I never wanted to share anything with her. I never wanted to share anything. It became a thing that it was more uncomfortable to share something with her than to just go through it. So when I attempted suicide at 17, when I was in an abusive relationship at 25, when I found myself in a marriage that I really shouldn't have got into, and I knew I shouldn't be in it, I wasn't going to share that with her. So none of the difficult parts of my life were shared with her, because I didn't feel able to. And that pivotal moment really in creating that was her menopause. Now, I'm not blaming her for how she dealt with it. I also have a belief in, no matter what happens in our lives, no matter the circumstances, no matter how we live them, that's how we're meant to live them. So I kind of simultaneously believe that, and it is, I can't marry it up fully, other than, the universe is weird. So I believe that, but at the same time, I also believe we have a duty to do our damnedest to access what I can only call it as our true nature, our true selves. What's that dinging? Don't know. Bear with me a second. I can hear a ding. Oh no, I know thoughts. Bear with me, because there's someone on the network. Oh, no. Typical, isn't it? Sorry, that ding is when, maybe you get it too, but whenever someone does anything on the network, the mighty network, which is Menopause, Anxiety, Freedom, there's a ding. And I don't want to close it down, because I'm frightened it will close down this Zoom meeting. Anyway, where was I? Rambling about menopause and anxiety. Yes, so I believe it is our duty to do our damnedest to, I'll take the glasses off again, Shirley, to connect with who we really are. And we do know there's a version of us, and menopause for me has become, if you haven't done it by now, you need to do it now. You need to do it now. And my mum needed to do that then, but well, she kind of did. I might share that in a minute. That's when, because I believe if we are courageous enough to get onto that journey, says, okay, I've ignored this long enough, but now I really do have to listen to whatever it is that's in here, wherever you think your core self is, in your heart, in your soul, in wherever you think it is. If I tap into every bit of courage I have now to find that version of me, then not only will my life become better for me, but my life will contribute more to the lives of others. Because here's the key thing. This is my fundamental driver. There is absolutely no point, and you hear this all the time, and I bet you've said it. You tell your children, or you tell young people, or you tell your friends, just be yourself. You know, when they're afraid, when they're nervous, when they don't think they're up to something, whatever that is, and you say, listen, just be yourself, because that will be enough. But who the hell teaches you how to be your effing self if you won't tap into your own courage to be yourself? How can you expect others to acknowledge what you've just said, or have the first clue about how the hell they do that? Yeah, what does that mean, be myself? Just gonna blow my nose because I think my nose is going to run in a minute. So you can tell this is the core of what I believe in. You cannot tell someone to be themselves if you've never modeled for them how the hell that works. What does that mean? If you don't know what it is to be yourself, to be fully connected, in touch with yourself, instead of, and this is where I got angry with my mum, expecting yourself, she expected me, but I'm a rule breaker. And that's the other part of what I do, is help people return to themselves and challenge norms. Now, those norms, those rules are on your terms. They don't have to be huge rules, but it's about challenging the rules that maybe you've chosen to live your life by because it seems like an easier ride, or you've always felt resentful of, like me, because they're other people's rules and you're living by them, but you don't want to be living by them. So I've lost my train of thought here. I know I have, but this is what happens if I get too passionate. I'm like, well, what was the key point? Oh, it's about challenging norms and being yourself. You cannot tell people to be themselves if you do not know how to be yourself. So if you want the people around you to understand what it is to be themselves, if you want the world to be different, better, kinder, more understanding, more generous, more uplifting, more exciting, whatever it is you want the world to be, then you have to find courage to be the version that of the world that you want to see. And I know, dropping into cliches here, which I find a little bit tiresome, because that then loses the power. Be the change you want to be the change you want to see. We can all like those, but listen to what that means. That means finding yourself. And if you're screaming, oh, yeah, but that's the whole point, that's the problem of menopause, I've lost myself, I don't know who I am anymore, I'm not sure what's going to happen. That's the negative, fear-driven interpretation of what's going on. And clearly, when I'm working with people, the first thing we want to do is calm the fear. Calm the fear. Because when you calm down the fear, then what begins to bubble up is the desire. Now, it starts really quietly, but you calm the fear, and then you begin to enable the bubbling up of desire, of what you really want for yourself, how you want each moment, each day, the dreams or goals. And I feel like I lapse into coaching cliches, and I don't want that, because this is not a coaching cliche. This is your life, your role in it. This is the future of the planet, the universe, humanity, your family. This is big stuff. And I'm not saying this to burden you, but to liberate you. But you have to be courageous, and you have to start by quelling the fear and allowing that murmuring up. Because my mother didn't do that, except in part. Okay, so I did say there was a part of her that did. So the part of her that did, and maybe this was her version, maybe this was how she came to terms with it and was able to then just settle again, which was her way. Now, for me, I'd have run with it, but it seemed to help her settle and feel happier. So what my mum did was she decided, this was in the days when transatlantic travel was way out of the financial reach of most people, but then a chap called Freddie Laker came along, and he set up the very first transatlantic budget airline. Long before Virgin, there was an airline called Laker Airways, and some of you may remember it. And my mum saw this as an opportunity, because she had wanted to go to the States for a long, long time. Remember, her best friend married a GI and went out there. Now, my mum also had, her first love was a GI. And I suspect, in fact, I know, she would use the phrase, carried a torch for him for a long time. So she knew that in her soul, she did not want to go through the rest of her life without at least having tried, without having done that thing that meant so much to her, which was to go to the States. And I think that she maybe had a dream that she would meet up with him and he would be the love of her life, and everything would change and she'd live there happily ever after, and never mind what happened to the rest of it, but it would all work out somehow. But whatever her motivation, I don't know, she never actually said, but she did it. She was dedicated. She bought those tickets. She went on her own. My dad was distraught. With hindsight, I suspect he was distraught because he knew about the man who was in America and maybe feared that she would find him and live happily ever after. At the time, I just thought he was being a man, you know. God, can't do the vacuuming without having a complete meltdown and a crisis. Don't know how to cook a meal. I know all men aren't like that. In fact, very few are these days. But my dad was. So she went there. She was very dedicated, very motivated. She made the trip. She traveled on a Greyhound bus across a huge swathe of America on her own. And that was very brave, very brave. And I admired her for it. And it was the tipping point where I realized, there's the person you are that you don't let out. And it was that demonstration of her courage that I was able to feed on. It was the little light that flickered sometimes when mine was in danger of going out. And that's what your family, your friends deserve, is model what it is to be yourself. So that when you say to them, just be yourself, you know what that means. So today is the anniversary of my mum's death. 1 year ago today. And that's why I shared the story. And that was long and winding, but life is long and winding. But I hope you've got the nub of it. It's sharing my journey of how she influenced me to get here, but also sharing the core drive that makes this more than just, I thought it might be quite nice to do some menopause work. For me, it's a mission. And it's not just about menopause. Of course it's not. It is about connecting people to themselves. And menopause and women, it makes most sense for me because I know how we hit that point where we feel lost. And it's an opportunity. Calm the fear. Allow it to bubble up. Work with someone to calm the fear. Work with someone to return to self. Whether that's me or someone else, or you can somehow manage it on your own. I did, but it was fucking painful and long, and I wouldn't go through it again for the world. But that's what my mum's given to me. So I come back to the paradox of, I do believe that we live the lives we're meant to live, even if they don't look like they're great lives, you know, even if it all seems to go horribly wrong, it's what you're meant to be doing. And my mum, I suspect, was meant to do what she did, to influence me to do what I do. And now it's my job to influence you and others to discover the absolute extraordinary power, strength, courage that you have within you to be something other than what you think you should be, irrespective of what you tell yourself about what your bosses won't accept, the organizations you work in, oh no, you don't understand the culture I work in, this doesn't work, Shirley. It does, but you quell the fear and you find the courage and the resources and the tools and everything you need to challenge the norms and not only survive, but create something that you can't even imagine right now, but something extraordinary, something wonderful, something you want, something you didn't even know you wanted, something you didn't know was possible. It is. And it all began with my mother. So thank you, Mum. And I can't say happy death because it's not. Anyway, I'm going to go out and visit. It's raining today, but we bought a hibiscus recently. Hibiscus. And it's in a big pot. And the reason I bought the hibiscus, because some of my ashes are in it. You're probably going, ooh. But it's important. I wanted to be able to, there is no gravestone, like there's no memorial somewhere in a cemetery somewhere for my mum. There's just what we have of her. And that's just the way we are in our family. So some of her ashes are in this hibiscus plant, because I remember when I was growing up, there was a beautiful big hibiscus that she loved, and my dad chopped it down. And so I thought, oh, I'll plant you a new one, Mum, and that's for you. So I'm going to go down and visit my hibiscus and wish you a brilliant rest of the day. I've got some client conversations this afternoon, which will be lovely, I know. And if you, please share. I think encourage people to come into this community. This is, the bigger it gets, the more powerful it becomes. It's got to be for the right people. This is not just come on if you're menopausal. This is about women who have that sense of wanting to connect with themselves again, wanting more for themselves, even if you don't know what that more is. So share the community, get people to join, engage with one another. Even if you can help one another be more you, then that is a result from my perspective. Okay, thank you. Have a brilliant rest of the day. And I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. Oh, I'm going to be ending the meeting.